Okay, hello. Welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival. Thank you for joining us today. For the secrets of being an extraordinary woman, we've got 3 authors on ambition, adventure, and equality. I'm Cheryl Popp, the owner of Sausalito Books by the Bay, and I'm going to be in conversation with 3 women who are themselves extraordinary, who have written about extraordinary women, how to be an extraordinary woman, and how a culture can help ensure that we can all become extraordinary women and succeed. So I'm very pleased to introduce a very powerful trio of women from around the world. We have Finland, Iceland, and the United States represented on this panel. And they have all written books. All 3 women have written books that have really helped redefine pathways to happiness and a better society for women, which I think also makes for a better society for men, just saying. Lara Bazelon is a writer, teacher, and advocate for racial and social justice. She's a law professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. And at that prestigious university, she directs the criminal and juvenile justice and racial justice clinics. Before that, she worked as a deputy public defender. And along the way, she got married, had 2 children, got divorced, and worked to create a very different kind of family, which you're going to hear about and you can read about in her book, which is Ambitious Like a Mother. In her research-based books, you'll read a lot about, Laura talks about liberating from working mothers from what can be fruitless and very frustrating attempts. I think many of us have done this, to balance work and home life and be the superwoman. And her book makes a very strong point about prioritizing your career is a good thing for your kids. So we're going to hear more about that. Mia Kankimäki is the author of 2 best-selling, award-winning books, which blend travelogue, memoir, biography, and woman's history. After getting a master's degree in comparative literature at the University of Helsinki and working for a long while in the Finnish publishing world, Mia left her job and moved to Kyoto, Japan, to write her first book, called Things That Make One's Heart Beat Faster. Her second book, which we're going to be discussing today, was published in 2018, but just recently translated into English. The Women I Think About at Night. And it's not about women and sex. No, it's very different. The Women I Think About at Night, Traveling the Paths of My Heroes. And it has already enjoyed tremendous success. 45,000 copies in Finland. It's been translated into 20 different languages, including the US and China. And in it, she traces the footsteps of unconventional, inspirational female pioneers like Karen Blixen, Yayoi, I'm not saying it right, Yayoi Kusama, who's a very famous artist you may have heard of, and some forgotten Renaissance painters who you probably have never heard of. We're also delighted to welcome Eliza Reid, who is a journalist, editor, and co-founder of the acclaimed Iceland Writers Retreat, which they just held. She grew up in Canada, but moved to Iceland in 2003. And as many of you know, she is also the First Lady of Iceland. So we're going to be talking about her very first book, The Secrets of the Sprakkar. And sprakkar is an Icelandic term for extraordinary women. And there's a reason that Iceland is ranked number 1 in gender equality by the World Economic Forum. It is a country that actually helps women thrive. And Hillary Clinton, refers to Eliza's book as a fascinating window into what a more gender equal world could look like and why it's worth striving for. So thanks to all of you for joining us today, especially those who traveled so far. Before we start our conversation, there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of our session, so be patient and we're going to allow plenty of time for that. So let's begin. Eliza, I'm going to start with you. The Secrets of the Sprakkar, how Iceland's extraordinary women are changing the world. How are they changing the world?
Well, I don't want to give the ending away quite yet because I'd like people to read the book. But the easy answer is that they're changing the world by bringing gender equality within reach. And what I notice, maybe especially as an immigrant to Iceland, someone who was not born and raised there, I feel a little bit, because I chose to make it my home and raise my family there, that I get to brag a little bit more about the country. And we are bringing gender equality within reach. And I think a big reason of that is because as a society, we've passed the tipping point of debating whether or not trying to work towards gender equality is an important goal, but more how we are going to achieve it. And I think that's an important distinction and something I try to talk a little bit about the book. The book doesn't talk about why gender equality is a good thing. I think if you're reading that book, you probably think it is.
Exactly.
So it's more telling the stories of extraordinary women within the country, but who are women just like you and I that we can all relate to in some way.
Iceland, which I didn't realize, I learned so much about Iceland reading this book, in addition to gender equality issues. But you have the highest percentage of women working outside of the home compared to any other country in the world. They have about 3/4 of the women working out of the home. In the United States, it's 56%. And there are programs that I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about: parental leave, healthcare that starts with prenatal and takes you through life, childminders. There are so many supportive programs there that have helped enable this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I'm sure Mia will know too that it's not something that's unique to Iceland, but a lot of these programs exist throughout the Nordic countries. But the policies that are particularly family friendly, I would say, are the parental leave policy, which is what's called use it or lose it. So it's something that is paid for by the government. It's not paid for by an employer. Everyone is entitled to it. And it gives one parent 5 months of paid parental leave and a second parent 5 months of paid parental leave, and then a third chunk of time that they split between them. And it's called use it or lose it, with the idea being that not all of the responsibility of taking leave is left to a mother, for instance. So fathers from a very young age then get involved in their children's upbringing, and then that helps them stay involved later on in life. And after that parental leave is finished, then a very heavily subsidized and very well supervised program of childcare takes over. My husband and I have 4 children together, which we had at 2-year intervals. And so we got all these sibling discounts. So when our first child started at the age of 2 in full-time childcare, that was already heavily subsidized, the second child then was 75% off, and the third and fourth children were free. We just had to pay for their food. So it just enables families to maybe choose more themselves the size of family they may wish to have, rather than have finances dictate whether or not they're able to afford it. And as you say, that means that women go back to the workplace. Women go back to the workplace, and men, the ideas are more involved in the home life as well. So there's more of a balance. And we're absolutely not perfect, but that's the idea behind it.
I think you're going in the right direction. We're going to switch gears now and go back in time a little bit when there weren't a lot of gender equality supportive programs for women, and talk about Mia's book. Because we're talking about the secrets and success of extraordinary women. And she writes about some women in history who didn't have all these advantages and really defied convention, even more so than we have today. And since we're talking about, she has profiled so many female adventurers and explorers. Karen Blixen, many of you may know of as the Out of Africa woman, is one of my favorites. She got me with Karen right away because I've always admired her. But she looks at women in history from all different walks of life. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you think their secret was, because it was harder in those days for them to defy convention and be successful and make a difference. What were their secrets?
It's really a difficult question to say what was their secret. I think the only thing, or the thing I find common to them was that all of them were really doing what they wanted to do. They had this one strong passion, and they just went for it, and they were doing it no matter what. And I think the point with my night women is that they are in no sense super women or perfect women, but they are just ordinary women with many flaws and issues and challenges. But for some reason, because they wanted to do, they were able to do what they did. And I've collected in my book some of the night women's advice, and for myself mainly, also for the reader, of course. One of my favorite advice is if you know what to do, if you know what you want to do, do it. And I think it sounds very simple, but it's sometimes very difficult to execute. I think we find all kinds of excuses why we're not doing the thing we want to do. But also, I think these women's examples prove that many of these obstacles are only in our heads. So if we really set our minds to do what we want to do, then it's possible.
So do what you want to do, have passion for what you want to do. Was there a tremendous amount of research involved? How did you choose these particular women? All of whom are very inspirational, but
it was really a question of personal choices. First, when I had this idea that I wanted to write about, I wanted to find inspiring historical women and really travel in the footsteps of them and compare my own experiences with their experiences. So I have to say the first thing I did was to think, where do I want to travel? That was East Africa and Italy and Japan. And then I started looking for women at those areas. After all, it's my life, and it took me 5 years to write the book. So it's nice to go to places where I want to go. So actually my first choice was Karen Blixen, because I wanted to go to the East African savannah. And the other criteria was that I wanted to find women I could really connect to, who had maybe gone through some similar things that I had, and because I wanted to ask for personal advice from them. And also women that were interested in the same things that I was. I wanted to compare my experiences with them and also know how it was for a woman to travel and make art and write at different times in history and in different cultures. So I was very happy to find these 19th century women explorers who were traveling around the world in their long Victorian dresses and corsets in extremely rough conditions. And even if I found many traveling women, I actually did not choose the rich noble women who traveled with big entourage, but I was I felt connected to, for example, the Scottish Isabella Bird, who was this 40s spinster who was suffering from headaches and insomnia and depressions and frustrations, felt very close to me. And who then at her 40s decided to start to travel and traveled for 30 years around the world, and finally became the first member of Royal Geographical Society in Britain and wrote about 10 books.
There's wonderful history in her book, but it is also a delightful memoir in the sense that she's it's really delightful because she goes back and forth between her experience and her search and trying to figure out what she wants to do and what she's learned from these different women. And she refers to them as her night women, which we're going to come back to in a minute. I want to jump to Lara now. One would think if women in those days could succeed as some of Mia's characters, what some real people in history did, that it would be even easier for us today. But as Lara points out in her book, it is not always so easy because we're trying to do everything. We're trying to be superwoman. We're trying to be the perfect mom, the perfect career person. And what she talks about in her book, and I'd like you to talk about further, is that prioritizing your career does not mean that you're having to sacrifice being a good mom. And she's done so much research that clinically proves you can be a better mom by and large if you are working. So can you talk about that concept a bit?
Sure. And let me know if you have trouble hearing me because I don't have a problem raising my voice if I have to. First of all, thank you so much for this introduction and for being here. This is such an amazing crowd and very lovely and energizing to be in Berkeley. So I think that my thesis is, I guess, somewhat deceptively simple in that I take on the premise that people who work outside the home, if their mothers, are somehow harming their children. And that's a perception that's really deeply ingrained in US culture. I think still 1 out of 4 adults believes that to be the case. And so I did look into the research with some trepidation because, like most women who are mothers, and most women are mothers, I do work outside the home. And that's for a combination of reasons. First of all, if I don't, we don't eat or pay rent. And second of all, because I'm really passionate about what I do. It makes me happy. It gives my life a purpose and a meaning. And so I was curious to know how those things, sort of the need, but also the desire, translated into what kind of a parent I was to my children, and whether this conventional wisdom that they'd be better off if I stepped back or stepped away or was home was true. And it's not my intention at all to start any sort of a mommy war, and I'm not here to advocate for one over the other. I think for too long, people have really used that to divide mothers and turn us against each other. I'm simply saying that if you do go out into the world and pursue your passion, whatever that is, and it brings you fulfillment and joy, albeit some level of stress, and it gives you financial independence, then you are modeling those qualities for your children. And they see you out there striving, sometimes falling on your face, but oftentimes doing very well. And it's inspirational for them. And it models important lessons for them about the kind of self-sufficient adults they can and should grow up to be. And so the research that I looked at towards the end of the book was longitudinal. There were meta-analyses. And basically, they just found that overall, the children of working mothers did just as well, if not slightly better, than the children of mothers who stayed at home, measuring on a number of metrics, including sort of life satisfaction, but also their ability to support themselves. And interestingly, for the sons, they tended to be more helpful at home with their own partners. So I came away from that very reassured because it sort of reinforced my own personal experience. And having said that, I will also say that over the course of that, I guess now 13 years of being a mother, I think I have felt sometimes that my decisions were maybe somewhat unconventional by the standards of my peers and just sort of contemporary American culture. And I did feel judged a lot externally, but also by myself, judging myself, I mean. And so the book is really about reassuring and affirming women who do go for it and have a passion and a drive, and they move toward that. And it's a reassurance that doing so is important not only for yourself, but for your children. It makes you a more fulfilled person and thereby, I believe, a better parent.
Yeah, it's basic, the kids are going to be better if mom's happy. And if she's happy working, even if it's a little stressful, I think it's a very viable theory. You also talk about this concept of embracing imbalance. One of her quotes is, "The work-life balance and the selfless mother are false gods." A very antiquated trope in some ways. So that was one of the other concepts I liked in your book. It's like, it's embrace imbalance.
I'm going to be real. I hate the term work-life balance. I hate it. It's not a possible thing to accomplish. If you think about it, how often are two kids on a seesaw and it's in perfect equipoise, where both kids are equally off the ground, balancing the seesaw? Or imagine like doing that physically to your body and having a handstand and staying perfectly in the air, not tilting too much this way or not tilting too much that way. It's not a thing. It maybe happens 1 or 2 minutes out of the day. Most of the time, something's coming up and something's coming down. We sell women on this idea that balance is possible, and we tell them that they're supposed to be striving for it. And I can tell you that as someone who tried and failed to achieve balance for over a decade, it's not a thing. It's really, I think, a trap and a way to shame women and make us always feel guilty and like we're not enough. And the truth of the matter is that life is about imbalance. If you think about walking, one of your feet is always off the ground, but that doesn't mean you're going to topple over. That's how we move forward in life. And what I like to think about is sort of the infinity symbol, which is my grandmother's favorite symbol. And, something's always coming up and something's always coming down. So sometimes it's your work and sometimes it's your family. And in the end, it creates its own kind of wave and its own kind of motion. And I think it's much healthier to think about it that way. And I also think it's healthy to think sometimes there's going to be seepage. You can't hermetically seal off those parts of your life. And I think if nothing else, the pandemic taught us that lesson. And for too long, women have been told that, don't let your kids interfere with your work, and don't let your work interfere with your kids, and don't bring up your kids as a reason you have to leave, and don't go pick up your kids, get the babysitter to do it because no one will ever give you a good assignment ever again. I find all of that very tiresome. And I try with my own law students to really show them something very different. And they see the kind of, I guess, the seams really of my life and how sometimes things are a little bit messy and I don't have everything completely under control. And I do that on purpose because I believe in honesty and transparency, but also I want them to understand that like they can go out in the world and have a successful career and get tenure at a law school and have all these other things going on that are sometimes erupting and piercing the surface, which is perfectly acceptable. But I think we just have to normalize that.
Thank you. Eliza, in Iceland, over here, there's, Lara talks a lot about the cult of motherhood and the sort of this, toxic reaction to female ambition. And in Iceland, it seems you've really blended, you honor motherhood, you really support it with all of the different programs, whether it's the parental leave or all the healthcare support that's provided. But at the same time, there's no stigma in Iceland about a single mom. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was another interesting concept that she delved into about why women can be so successful.
It's an interesting phrase you use about honoring motherhood as well, because I think a lot of it in Iceland is just pragmatism. We're a small country and we're 350,000 people. So it's very, very small. So you can't run a society if people aren't working in jobs or a few jobs and paying their taxes. And when you've invested in people's education, you're not going to get a return on your investment. So there's a lot of pragmatism there to encourage everybody to contribute as fully as possible to society. But as you say, one of the things that I examine in the book are all different facets of society that I think contribute to a country that's aiming for gender equality. And that isn't just official government policies, but it's really, as you said, a sort of social mores. And I think, again, a lot of this would exist in Finland as well. As you say, no stigma towards single mothers. So the vast majority of parents who have children or mothers who give birth to children are doing so unwed. Probably about, I think it's well over 2/3. But most of those people would be in a relationship with a father. But it's expensive to hold a wedding. And there's no stigma, again, whether or not you're married or not. Nobody changes their names when they get married. So there's kind of no way of telling if someone is married or not. So people just decide to save the money and they're living together. Maybe a strong example is our former president, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who was the world's first female president who served from 1980 to 1996. And she was elected in 1980, and she was a divorced single mother. And she had a tough campaign. I mean, it wasn't easy. And you can imagine then some of the questions that she got on the campaign trail, but she won. And an entire generation of people grew up having a female head of state. And, there's a story of boys saying, oh, I'd love to be a president, but can boys be presidents?
That's a change. I like it. Mia, back to you. You mentioned earlier that it's so important. One of the secrets to being an extraordinary woman is to really follow your passion, do what you want to do, which I think is great advice to women to make a difference and fulfill their dreams. Something you talk about in your book, I think it's near the end, is find yourself a magic mountain. Can you expound on the magic mountain theme?
I think it's what I mean with the magic mountain is that you should find yourself an environment where whatever it is that you want to do is supported, that you are lifted up and not put down. I experienced it in Germany when I was in a artist residence writing this book. The place actually reminded me of Thomas Mann's classic book Magic Mountain. And before I went there, I had been kind of struggling with my choices, the fact that I had left my job and wanted to be a freelance writer, and if this is like an okay lifestyle. And some of people at home were asking me that, okay, now your first book is published, and when will you go back to your normal job? Like this was just a silly phase, and I should go back to doing like respectable things. So there in that artist residence in Germany, I was surrounded by artists and writers who were everyone doing their own thing and own projects. And I really realized that this is a proper work. This is how some people live. And I felt that I was supported by the community. I was not an odd one to do something strange.
Thank you. Lara, can you talk about the title of your book, Ambitious Like a Mother?
It's hard to come up with a title of a book, and lots of times I do, and then other people tell me it's not a good idea. But this one, I really was not willing to let go of, because I think that ambition is a positive quality. It's a positive trait. But in our country, in the US, we think that it's wonderful and cool and awesome when men are ambitious. And then when women are ambitious, it's the exact same trait, but we think of them as self-aggrandizing, as grasping, as somehow full of themselves. And if you don't believe me, look no further than some recent examples. So, as probably many women in this audience know, when Bill Clinton was running for president in the 90s, Hillary Clinton had been supporting the family while he pursued a political career. She worked at a law firm as a partner, and she made most of the money and allowed them to live a middle-class life. And when asked about that, she said, well, I could have stayed home and baked cookies, but instead I chose to pursue my profession. And that remark haunted her for the rest of her political career, to the point where the night before the 2016 election, the New York Times published a long story entitled Hillary Clinton and the Story of the Unbaked Cookies. Fast forward to this past election, and there was all this speculation about who Joe Biden was going to pick. And when it became clear that he had focused on Kamala Harris, the pushback was that she was, quote, too ambitious because she's going to want to be president herself. So I think we should all just pause for a minute and think about that. Every single vice president in recent memory has indeed wanted to be the president themselves, including Joe Biden, with the exception of Dick Cheney, maybe not a model we want to emulate. So the idea that this is somehow a knock on her and a problem is pretty ridiculous. I think we also see it in this strange public performance that ambitious women have to perform. So when Amy Coney Barrett was having her Supreme Court hearings, she said, "Some people know me as a judge, but I am better known as a carpool mom, the van driver, the pastry chef at home, et cetera," essentially signaling, yes, I've reached these dizzying heights and I am on the cusp of sitting on the highest court in the United States, making enormously consequential, as we now know, decisions about women and their bodies. But don't think about that. What I really am is a soccer mom. And it's this idea that we have to say these things so that people won't hate us. Literally. Hillary Clinton had to say that it was an honor to vote for herself. Basically, that's like saying, please don't hate me. I think I'm more qualified than Donald Trump, so I'm going to pull that lever. So I just feel like let's take this word ambition, and all it means is wanting to excel and achieve things, and take it back. And take it back for women, and take it back for working mothers. So that's why I felt that way about my book.
Eliza, based on all of the remarkable things that are happening in Iceland, which you're very involved with, what would you recommend? We've talked a little bit about politics, women in politics, but what about women in the business world, the corporate culture? What advice would you offer American corporate culture to better embrace and involve women? Because I think in your book, you even talk about in Iceland, there still aren't that many female CEOs. And despite being such a, into gender equality, what can you do? What can we do? Because I think having been in corporate America a long time, and I did fine, but they're just, we need to make more strides there as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's more men called Arnie who run companies traded on the Icelandic Stock Exchange than there are women. And that's not a really common name. So, it's an area that we need to improve on. But I think, and interestingly, Iceland has quota laws even for the boards of publicly traded companies. And there's been a big push to encourage more women in senior positions. And yet we still don't see them reaching the pinnacle of success. And so what are the takeaways from that? I think in my book, I have a chapter on corporate Iceland. I speak to 3 women. And some of the takeaway messages, I think, there are the fact that we need to elevate each other's voices. We need to lift each other up. We need to make sure that everybody is being heard when we speak, and that those of us who have maybe more of a platform in some situations share that platform with other people who don't have one. And that we remind people that we need to be seeing the world with not just gender equality glasses, but equitability glasses, as I call them. It's so easy for companies, exactly, to think, well, we need someone new for the board. I play golf with Arnie and I'll have him on my board. He's a good guy. We went to school together. And we get along great. We understand each other's thoughts. And of course, everybody in this room knows, that the more diverse a company is, the more success it has on its bottom line. But somehow or other, it's so easy for all of us to fall. We're all busy people. So it sounds like, but I know Arnie's great at golf and I don't have to think about getting more. And it's human nature as well to default to that and not maybe take the extra step, but it's so important. And so for the rest of us, we need to make sure that we're speaking up. We need to be speaking up about injustice. When it comes to corporate Iceland, we need to be investing more in women-led companies, and we need to have women not only being invested in, but doing the investments. That's a huge issue in Iceland, at least, that startups are being run almost exclusively by men or men-women combinations, very few led by women. And so these are all areas that we need to continue to persevere on. But I hope that some of the messages that I have in my book are really that we can all make a difference no matter what we're doing in our lives, because all of us are role models, whether that's in the boardroom or in our schools or our workplaces or our places of worship or within our families and our friendship circles. And we all have a voice that we can be using. And so it's up to us if we want to be positive role models or negative role models, but we need to use our voices.
Thank you. Excellent advice. Mia. And after this, we're going to open it up to questions for the audience. But one last question for you, for me. I picked up her book. I just found out that I would be moderating this like a week ago. So I had to read 3 books in 1 week on top of running a bookstore and, being, I don't have any children, so that was not an issue. But I picked it up in the middle of the night thinking, I got to, I'm insomnia. If you have insomnia, it's great to own a bookstore because there's always something to read. And of course I couldn't put the book down. And it was so ironic because one of the things she talks about, in fact, it's in the title, is the women I think about at night. And I know Lara and Eliza have been talking about contemporary women who have broken through the glass ceiling and made a difference and changed the world to be a better place for women. But Mia goes back to a lot of these women in history that have also, those are her night women. And I think that those stories can be just as inspirational. And there I was reading it in the middle of the night, getting inspired. So where did you come up with your night woman? Were you an insomniac also?
Yes.
Okay.
This project started for me a few years ago. I was 40-something. I was single, no kids, and I had just left my job and published my first book. And I didn't know what to do next, and I was literally not sleeping, and I was quite anxious at nights. And then I started to think about these historical women I could maybe take as an example for myself, and who had been maybe not leading conventional lives, but done some brave choices and followed their passions. So yes, first I think I thought more about women I already knew, like Frida Kahlo and Georgia O'Keeffe, but then I wanted to find more women I didn't know about. And I found out there are so many interesting women in history, like literally hundreds and thousands, and someone should really write an encyclopedia about them. Many women who have been very famous at their times, leading remarkable lives, and we don't find them in the history books. So there are really so many stories we should tell, and we want to hear.
Yeah. And I think what inspired me was these women 100 years ago were defying tradition and breaking barriers. And it's sort of like, wow, if they could do it then, I think we can do it now. Because we're better equipped, and we've got a long ways to go maybe, but we've made great inroads. So I have a lot more questions, but I want to open it up to the audience. Any of you have questions for any one of our speakers or for all 3 of them? Back here. Number 77. And we're going to bring you a microphone if you hang on for a second. And I think it's okay to take your mask off to speak, because it's really hard to hear through a mask.
Hi. Hey, Eliza. Hey, very much enjoying all of this, but wanted to challenge all of the presenters to talk about being unapologetic, because women creating space for themselves, often it's predicated by an apology. And if you cannot just stand up for yourself, and even in just the most ordinary interactions, how can you stand up for yourself and fight against times when our space is being restricted? The fact that even our own bodies are being restricted, our uteruses, sorry, let's not go into that one. No, I can't help it. Our uteruses are being controlled right now in the United States to such an extreme that we cannot even define our pregnancies in only a few weeks once the Supreme Court's decision is finally officially out, in something close to, 26 states here in the United States. How do we stand up and say, this is our space, and not apologize for taking it?
You know, as someone who grew up in Canada, I find it doubly difficult because as a woman, I feel like I have to apologize, and as a Canadian, which is my stereotype as well. So I'm so sorry about that, but I consciously think about it. You're right, Ellen, because when I'm writing an email all the time, I have this tendency to want to say, I'm so sorry to bother you. It's just a quick question. It's only this, I think we're so much taught to kind of reduce what we have to say as if it's unimportant or insignificant, even in everyday interactions, because we don't want to be a bother, because we're taught, we're so socialized to minimize ourselves and to silence ourselves and to be, to make things easier for everybody else, but not worry about what we have to say, and to make room for everybody else. And I consciously now, even when I'm writing an email, try never to use the word just or only, and I just say, I'm asking for this. And it's like everything else, I have to try to remember not to say sorry. And I also feel that because I'm in this, I'm so incredibly fortunate and privileged to be serving in this role as First Lady now. Part of me, my own instinct to socialize sometimes feels like I shouldn't stand up and speak out about X or Y because it's a little thing, because other people there's so many other bigger problems. I shouldn't say anything. But then I try to remind myself that it doesn't cost me very much either to speak up. And so I have to say something, because how can I leave that to everybody else to say, because even if I think what I'm going to talk about is a small issue. So I always try to speak up about something that I think is important, because I know, well, at least in Iceland, people listen to what I have to say. And I never apologize for it, even though my husband calls me Annalisa when I'm done. Afterwards, I say, "Did I say that right? Should I mix that up? I don't know." He says, "Stop, it's done, but don't apologize."
Thank you. Okay, Diane.
Thank you. Oh, my mask. I'm Diane LeBeau. One of the weird things of getting older is looking back at so many decades, and I've been a feminist revolutionary since I was about 4, and I've seen we've fought the battles for abortion and for women's rights and to get rape declared a crime, and we continue to fight them. I have a couple of questions for you. Recently, I was quoted in a book by an amazingly interesting Oxford scholar. It's called Androcentrism. And this elderly gentleman took it upon himself to go back to Neolithic times and traced, why the hell in most cultures do women end up being treated inferiorly? And, the knee-jerk reaction is that physical strength or something, but it's more than that. And so he looks at cultures like matrilineal cultures, as I did in my writing, where women were respected. So I don't know if you have any views of that, like, here we go again. I'm not wanting to quote that man who said that, but
Any of you want to comment on that?
yeah. Why do we keep ending up in this position, and maybe more important, what do we do now? Because we're all pretty well educated and we have more opportunities than women did in past generations.
You have to continue fighting. You just have to
persist.
Yeah, it is persist. Yeah. I think it is persistence. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 10 steps back. And we just have to keep moving the agenda forward, even though it suffers setbacks. Yeah. And I think that is historical. I mean, you can look at history, and that's happened throughout the centuries.
The World Economic Forum said too that the pandemic set back the number of years before we achieve gender equality globally by a whole generation, 36 years. So, and that's nobody's fault, the pandemic. This just happens. So, persist is a great word, I think.
Are there other questions? In the back, we'll jump to the back again. And then we'll get you next.
Hi, I'm Anshu. I wanted to name something that's a bit shameful, I think, which is internalized sexism, and the fact that it is not always the case that we uphold each other, notably in the corporate world. I've certainly experienced that. And I wonder what you think and how you lived through that, how we can, address it even in the way we live and what you write, and also how that has impacted actually our presence in professions of caring. I mean, most of the nurses, the psychotherapists, they are. And so do we then internalize those values and think that, well, that's the feminine quality? Or are we auto-promoting it somehow, out into the world? So realizing our own worst nightmares ourselves in a sense. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't think that there are sort of inherent professions that women are somehow better at doing, but I think they've been socialized to believe that they're, well, first of all, I mean, there were only certain professions that women could do only a few generations ago. So when my mom was 3, her father at 31 died tragically of a heart attack with no warning. And her mother, who was 28, had to support them. And the only job that she could get was as a teacher or a nurse or a housekeeper. Those are basically the 3 jobs that were available to women, most women in the 40s and the 50s, which is in the early 40s was when this happened. So there's sort of a historical tradition of women being told these are the only things that you can do. And it's not to say that some women don't actually want to do those things and are excellent at them. They are. I mean, I'm in the helping profession. I'm an educator, and I don't do it because I felt like I had no choice. I feel like it's an honor and I love doing it. But the point is, if you want to go to medical school, which my mother did, and graduate first in your class, which she also did, you can do that too. And for too long, I think we were telling women that was really beyond them. That was beyond their intellectual capabilities. That was going to mean that nobody would want to marry them, which is what my mother was told repeatedly, that no one would want her. Or that, later when you have children, that somehow they're going to end up permanently in therapy. And by the way, everyone should go to therapy for some part of their lives. And people ask me if I'm worried that my kids will end up in therapy. I'm like, I'm not worried. I hope they go. But I think that that's sort of a historical problem, and we internalize that and think, okay, I really can't be a STEM person. I really can't be come up with an idea for a startup because the only people who are going to get funded are men, or they're the ones with the best ideas. And I think we do a little bit do it to ourselves, but I think also it's incumbent on us to really push back against the internalized feelings that we have that we're lesser than. And part of that too is, I think, supporting and helping women. And actually, we were saying before the panel started that we were so happy to see men here. I always am when men come to talks like this, because what I think is, okay, I'm looking at a potential ally. Of course, men can also hold up women and support them. And women who have achieved a little bit or a lot can turn around and give that back, give back the mentoring and the support and the opportunity. So yes, I think that internalized sexism exists within us. And I also think that we can constantly be pushing back against it and really always striving to overcome it.
I will just add, the more you talk about it, the more you write about it, and the more you read about it. Give people books that talk about women who have defied tradition and have been successful. And Lara talks a lot about her mom, who was a doctor, graduates first in her class from med school. The more you hear those stories, the more young girls hear those stories, it inspires them,
And we don't need to change ourselves to fit into some kind of male mode. I have an Icelandic friend who started working in investment banking in Iceland, and on her first day, in the US actually, she was told you can be one of 3 things. You can be the babe, you can be the bro, or you can be the bitch. And those are your 3 options as a woman in a company. I
was in that industry.
We could change that.
I was in that industry. I can vouch for that.
But that's it. We shouldn't be demeaning or somehow devaluing what some people see as feminine characteristics. Those are very powerful in a lot of situations.
Exactly. You had a question right here, I think, in the gray sweater. Yes.
I guess I just wanted to ask Laura a question. You talk about ambition and mothers, motherhood coming out at the seams in business or whatever, and the other way around. But it seems like you're talking about mothers who have certain advantages in careers that are professional careers. versus people who have to work 2 or 3 jobs. And I'm just wondering if you've thought about that when you're thinking about balances and how people do it all, because, for a lot of people, it's not always possible economically. So it feels a little bit like that doesn't consider every woman and every person in this society. And it's probably different in Iceland, which is a much more homogenous culture in some ways, I think. But I don't know anything about Iceland.
Well, thank you for naming that. So what I did in the book was I interviewed a cross-section of women, about 50 women, and I was very intentional about it. I interviewed women across race and ethnicity, geography, age, marital status, sexual orientation, and class. So I did talk to women who were in the positions that you're talking about. And you're right, it's completely different. I mean, I think we should name class and we should name race, because women who are less financially secure and less well educated and women of color are in some ways doubly and triply burdened because of the additional stresses, the additional prejudices, and the additional precarity that they experience in their life. So I did talk to those women. One thing that has been really interesting, and I talk about one of them just a little bit, and then also kind of go back to an issue about, has the pandemic set women back or not? I followed this one woman named Diana, who came here from Vietnam as an immigrant, not speaking any English when she was 14, didn't go to college, became an esthetician and was working in a nail salon in pretty exploitative conditions, raising 2 children, working constantly. She said she worked so much she felt, quote, like a dead body. And she decided to quit and go into business for herself, to open up her own business. And it's been really successful. And one of the cool things that we talk about, the spillover effect, is that when she took this big risk, and her husband was very nervous and told her not to do it, her kids really encouraged her. And she didn't actively recruit her clients from the salon, but most of them came with her. And every time her phone rang and a client was calling to book an appointment, her kids were watching and they were there seeing that. So I don't necessarily think that you have to be in high finance to set a really positive example. She was one of the most motivated, inspirational, successful people that I was able to follow in the course of doing this research. But the other thing I want to say about race and class and pandemic is that, especially early on, but even as recently as January and February and March, all anybody wanted to write about was the Great Resignation, the she session, how women were going to be set back a generation. If I read one more piece about anti-ambition or how all I want to do is be average, I was going to pitch a fit. And what's really interesting is that that's not true. That the Great Resignation never happened. It's not a thing. Most women, and this is a finding from a Harvard economist, not me, most women hung on through the pandemic. They hung on by their fingernails, but they persevered. And they proved that they could do the same jobs under flexible conditions. Now, you are absolutely right that say if you're a fast food worker, you're not going to have as much room to negotiate. But here's the thing. We're now at this really interesting moment in our country where you have this proven track record of women producing under crushing conditions where they had basically 5 jobs because they were the lunch lady and the homeschooler and whatever. And they still hung in there because that's what we do. We endure. And they emerged with this track record. And now what we have is scarcity in the labor market. And it's really scarcity across sectors. People are desperate to hire in hospitality, in all kinds of industries, blue, white, pink collar. And so I've been talking to recruiters who place women, particularly in jobs in all kinds of industries. And what they're telling me is they're encouraging their clients to bargain hard, to bargain for flexibility. And when I say flexibility, I don't mean it as a white collar thing necessarily. It's I don't want that restaurant shift. I want this one so I can go get my kids and not have to pay a babysitter to go get them. I want this benefit. I want this extra thing. And, part of it too is not apologizing and asking for what you deserve. It's really hard to advocate for yourself. It's so much easier for us to advocate for our kids or our spouses or our friends. It's so easy for me to talk about how amazing all those people are, and really hard for me to say, I want a raise. But women are really being encouraged to do that. And they're being encouraged to take sort of this dismantled structure, right, of flexibility and different hours and Zoom, if that's possible, and make it permanent in the sense of saying, we're not going to go back to the old structures that were not working for women. And we don't have to. I've now proved to you that there is another way to do things. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say in the short, selfish way is read the book, because I swear there's other people in it. And in the long way, I do feel some of this seepage and spillover and bargaining and empowerment is really not just like a wealthy, white, educated woman thing. I think it's a women everywhere thing. And that was what I was really trying intentionally as much as I could to do in the book.
Yeah, excellent point. We're going to have to move on because there's another session scheduled here, but I want to encourage all of you to come by the Sausalito Books by the Bay booth, number 90 on Alston. You can talk to these lovely ladies, these writers further. We'd be happy to sell you a book and they'd be happy to sign it. So round of applause, please, for our wonderful, wonderful authors.